I think I might be outgrowing Final Fantasy, or if not, I already have. Um, that's probably what I'm going to title this video. I thought about making like a full, dedicated point by point thing. Well, it's like my typical essay, but I'm going to try out something new. Like, this one's going to be different from my other kind of videos. Better actual established YouTube essayists would probably put this on like their second channel, but with I don't know, only 5 videos right now, I don't really have the means to justify a second channel, but also I'm early enough in my career where I can just decide it, but to experiment. So I have finished Final Fantasy 16. I bought it day one. I knew that I wanted to play it pretty off the jump, and before that I was playing Tears of the Kingdom, and I put about 80 to 90 hours in Tears of the Kingdom. And with Final Fantasy 16 coming along, I was just messing around in Tears, doing literally anything except the main story. And then as Final Fantasy 16 came around, I was like, okay, it's time to stop messing around, let's just do it. So I beat the main story, cried, saved Zelda, and then I moved on to 16, starting with the demo, which one of the things that I loved about this game right off the bat is that the demo was not only free, but it carried over. I wish more games did that. In order to have a game on the Xbox 360, you had to have a demo. And being a kid who didn't have that much money, or had to be very strategic with how many games I could buy, I just played literally every demo. I do miss that era. Demo disc, bring those back. At this point, I've beaten it. I think it's been about a month since I've beaten Final Fantasy 16. I have put 70 hours into Final Fantasy 16. I've gotten 64% of the trophies, and my most rarest trophy is the Masterclass, upgrading all the feats and abilities to the maximum, which I would like to see. I think easily 10 hours of that, of the 70 hours, is just grinding, finding a farm spot. That's what I've done with every single Final Fantasy I've ever played. I find a grind spot, and then I'll just put on a secondary media and just grind away and get way over leveled. I even did that in Elden Ring. Still, give you an idea of how I do this with JRPGs, which the idea of I'm learning now how harmful the idea of a JRPG, differentiating between a JRPG and just a regular RPG is. And so I'm trying to undo that from my lexicon, but also it's undoing half a life worth of verbiage. My very first Final Fantasy was 10, then 7, then 8, and then I watched the Let's Play of 9 in college, but I played 13 in high school, and then 15 I got at launch, and then this one I have gotten at launch. So I have a decent Final Fantasy resume, and I like it. I put 70 hours. I'm not going to put 70 hours into something I don't like. I have a full-time job. I have an hour and a half commute. So if I'm going to put my time into something, then it's because I like it. But I have such conflicting feelings about it. First off, right off the bat, this is the most different from any Final Fantasy I've played, that anyone's played, because of the lack of a party. There is just Clive. You can't upgrade anyone else's abilities, really. It really is his story, and all the dev interviews I've seen have really, it's incredible how easily they dismiss that parties. And I can wrap my head around them just doing away with turn-based. It started with Final Fantasy 15, and then they further tested the waters with Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I've also played. I don't know if I mentioned that, but they've been testing the waters into that. So I can understand how easy it is for them to just ditch the turn-based system, especially also with the emergence and growth of Final Fantasy XIV, which that one depends on your class. For me, I play a rogue lancer, and so that really is the same. The thing that blew my mind was how easily they just say, oh yeah, we just decided to not have a party, to not have any other characters be playable because we want to focus on Clive and his story. Because like that is like such an integral part of Final Fantasy to me, to have how everyone's story, like, yeah, you have your main guy, like you have your Cloud, you have your Squall, you have your although with Final Fantasy X it's different because like Tidus is technically the main character. I'm not calling him Tidus, but Tidus is technically the main character, but there is an argument to be made that he is a red herring. Like it's Yuna's story, but he is the vehicle through which we see it. Lightning very much becomes the main character. Noctis is the main character, but like just as much at least up until the first 13, like it just as much is the story of all the other party members as it is like any which one. And there is something to be said about the fact that like, because you have such a diverse set of characters, it's kind of like an Encanto problem where like you have all these different characters, you give them just enough of a personality for you to imprint upon so that everyone can just like choose their favorite character and that can be their favorite. And there is something to be said about the fact that they could have like pressed in and like made Clive a much more developed character, except they didn't. And I'll get to that when I get to the characters. But like still just like sticking with gameplay, I had mentioned that like the combat there definitely are parts where it gets boring. There are parts where a lot of the times that like if I knew we were just gonna go through like a long thing, I would just put on like a auto evade, auto attack, just because like I was like I'm bored with this and I can get on. But one of the other things also is the lack of an elemental system. Like the icons and powers you get are very like set to a certain playing style, and so you could be whatever you want. Like you could play it however you want in a style that suits you. If you want to be a slow but strong tank, you can do that. If you want to be a fast and quick like death by 1,000 cuts kind of person, like you could do that. It really facilitates to all kind of things. But the thing is that the game doesn't really incentivize you to explore other styles or explore other elements. Like in past Final Fantasies, like you would have like a certain like character for a specific thing, like a character who had certain things, like a white mage, a black mage, whatever the hell Riku was. You had a tank like Auron, and you would use them for different parts as different enemies, and if you underleveled somebody, then you would be punished for it. And I really liked that. And I thought that maybe there later on that there would be something there where like, oh, that like if you don't use the wind or ice enough, or you don't level them up enough when you're like starting out, then like you'll be punished later. But no, actually, if anything, it's the opposite, where it actually hurts you to use Garuda later on, even though she's the first icon you technically get. That's not like what your base stat is. And I thought that was kind of underwhelming. I thought that was a little like disappointing, but also it didn't ruin the game for me. It just, especially this being a big AAA game where you want people to feel comfortable. Like if I wanted to explore a different kind of play style, then I would have to seek that out. Like there's nothing in the game necessarily for you to practice with a different kind of playing style. Like if you wanted to get really good at Garuda or Titan, there really isn't any enemy that you could go practice with that you wouldn't be just as equally served button mashing with. That said though, I think where this game really shines, and from what I've seen, a lot of people who don't like this game are the people who didn't do any side missions at all, which that is just like insane to me in two ways. In that I like the story of the game only because I did every single side mission. As soon as I saw like a green notification thing come up, which also I do love that it just is blatantly the assets from Final Fantasy XIV. I know that most of the dev team moved over from Final Fantasy XIV in order to do this, and so it makes sense that they're just like, hey, instead of just doing that, let's just bring that over, because you know, game development is hard. You like reuse as many assets as you can. But also as important, like story-wise, as these side missions are, it really is sad that like most of them are just like some kind of fetch quest, like go kill this monster, go talk to this person, go collect 3 of these things. Then in order to get those 3 things, you have to like kill a thing. Like it got old pretty quick. And so from that perspective, I understand people not wanting to do them, but also it sucks because like there's such a rich and great story that like it's just so much better. The only reason I like the story at all, even here, is because of the work I did in the side quest. And in a lot of ways, the side quests are more satisfying than what you get in the actual main story. And the last part in just of like gameplay, this one is kind of on me because I went from playing Tears of the Kingdom right into this. So I went from like a masterclass in open world to like a Final Fantasy game that like Final Fantasy has always been like almost painfully linear. Like it very much is do this and do that, but it almost feels like it wants you to explore. Like it almost feels like an open world, but then it isn't. Like with Tears of the Kingdom, it's like, oh, what's that? Like, oh, you see some trees in the distance, you can just go. And with Final Fantasy, I kept wanting to do that. I kept wanting to be like, oh, I want to go into those trees, and then like being hit by like an invisible wall. And again, that's on me. Final Fantasy has never been an open world, even though this game very much wants you to feel like it is. Although that could just be like the Final Fantasy XIV influence. But it's not even that, it's also like the world feels empty. Like besides just like the trees not being able to go there, like what you do have, it's not that empty is not the right word. What is I don't know if there's a word for it, but the thing that I feel with the story and the world is that the world is meant to only complement the story, which is Clive's story. The world is only meant to fulfill Clive, and it doesn't feel like an actual real lived-in world. And from there, okay, now let's talk about the story. So I've seen some of the criticism that this game feel like it wants to go out of its way to tell you this isn't your dad's Final Fantasy, to tell you how different it is. And I think that's a little unfair. I'm not gonna lie, there are some moments of like very gratuitous violence. Like this, you just want to show off. Like you want to earn that rated M rating, but for the most part, I will say that it's pretty tame, all things considered. Considering what Final Fantasy is, there's only a very few instances of like out of character gore. Like you would have seen it in any of the other past iterations of it. But what I will say is that this is very much Game of Thrones. It very much feels like that in both the good, like the political machinations in terms of like the political thriller kind of way, and also the way in the beginning, the seamless integration of ordinary with the supernatural, with the fantastical. Like Game of Thrones had dragons and shit, and like without talking about it too much, because you know there's a strike, we support writers, pay your writers, even if they're bad. All those writers deserve a living wage, no matter how bad they write something in the end. But what I will say is that like all the political machinations mixed in with the fantastical in the beginning is really good until it's not. And Final Fantasy has always been like a ragtag group of misfits attacking the throne god, and religion, like usually the bad guy is the church or something. And with 16, at first it very much makes it feel like there is going to be a culmination of monarchy and God, or Ultima as the villain is called. By the end of the game, there's no attention paid to the political stuff, like all the like intricacies, the logistical warfare that we were learning about, gone. Like I will say, I don't know, to its credit, it doesn't make you feel stupid for caring about that, but it really does not matter. Like who is going to be king, who is going to be queen, who is going to rule like the land does not matter in like the last 20% of the game at all. Which, now that we've mentioned it, the monarchy aspect of it is interesting to explore now, and there is something to talk about for me personally, which again is one of the reasons why I've liked it, why I put in 70 hours. The political machinations of this game is an interesting thing. This is the third Final Fantasy game that I have interacted with. I can't really speak to 1 through 6, but this is the third one that I've interacted with that directly deals with monarchy. Final Fantasy 9, 15, and now this one. I can't remember if I got far enough in Final Fantasy 14 to deal with the monarchy. It's interesting as I've gotten older. Not even as I've gotten older, actually. Since I've read one specific book. It's called The Good Immigrants, and it's a book, a collection of essays. And I read it at the peak of the pandemic. And there's a line in there, a couple lines that stick out to me that I really, really like and have since changed how I view monarchy stories. It's not that I can't enjoy them. It's that I just look at them differently through a different lens. Why are monarchies the narrative default? Can we dream beyond royalty? In my wildest dreams, there is no king. I killed the king. The king is dead. All power to the people. The hereditary right to rule offends me almost personally. Whether I encounter it in fiction or in reality, I rate it, as ideas go, somewhere between eugenics and phrenology. Human history is full of monarchs. Let's leave them where most of them are, in the past. The societies I dream of organize themselves around knowledgeable, democratic choices. The dream extends past even the nation state. No kings, no queens, no royal presidents. Temperamentally, I'm a regicide. One of the criticisms I've seen of this game is that, like, Clive is a prince who waits until he's 30 years old to do something about slavery, which that's such a lazy criticism. Like, if that's a genuine criticism you have of the game that like keeps you from enjoying it, you're a boring person. There's so much to unpack here, but this is also an interesting thing in like this is one of the first Final Fantasy games that like directly with their whole chest says these people are slaves. Like there's been like inclinations of like these people are lower class citizens, but they just straight up say, yeah, this is slavery. And Clive, the prince monarch, is on a mission to not necessarily stop slavery, but to create a world where everyone can choose for themselves the life they want to live. Which is well and good. A little too libertarian leaning for my taste, but hey, you know, like you gotta sell to the masses. You know, that's the thing about AAA gaming. You gotta sell to everyone. So hey, I understand it. But at no point in the story is it ever called into question. One is like, what is the point of a king? Do we need a king? Do we need a monarch at all? Do we need a ruler? And the game kind of just implies yes if they are good. If they are Clive, then yes, but we never really see any like other exploration. Like Clive is never really called into question in terms of his mission. Which also, okay, so back to the slavery thing, that one is also a very hollow kind of thing. I definitely understand why Square Enix did not want to include any black people or any like darker skinned people. There are very few people that are like my skin tone, kind of like olive with like an orange undertone. And like I don't believe the lie, the like public politician speak that they say that like, oh, we wanted to make it like accurate to the times, because like one, that's just like objectively wrong that like there were no black people in Europe during like medieval times, but also like it's like factually wrong at worst, and like at best is like you have this fantasy world, you have chickens the size of horses. Why is like some melanin on some people like such a foreign, why is that one so unbelievable compared to everything else? The actual point, okay, so in this world, in the 16 world, the slaves are people who can use magic. Like, if you are born, they are called bearers. If you are born capable of using magic, then you are enslaved. By the decree of the king or the emperor, you are subject to manual labor. You are taken away from your family. You are raised in terrible conditions. And it's really interesting because these are the people that are born with an inherent betterness or an inherent advantage over those who have not, and yet they are the ones who are like subjugated to these horrible conditions. It's a standard issue Final Fantasy magic system where like there are limits to it and there are consequences for using the magic, which I do really like, because it does answer the question like, wait, why don't these people just, you know, blast away? Like, why don't these people just like Zeta flare their way out? And that's an interesting, and like it answers that, because if you use magic too much, then like you crumble away into nothing. Like you suffer a horrible death. And so overall, it does answer like those underlying questions. And then there are also like dominant, and then there are dominants, ones who are capable of calling upon these gods with phenomenal cosmic powers. And they are either the ruling class, or they are also subjugated to the same cruel conditions as those who can't. But the characters that we meet that are these slaves, that all are these bearers, are, as I mentioned, hollow. Like there's no real like depth to them, and there is no real like exploration of the slave owners. Everyone you meet who owns a slave or like that, like, or supports slavery is just like unequivocally bad. There is no redeeming quality in them, really. And I think there was a missed opportunity to really explore how it is that people really justified it to themselves. Like but the thing is, it's very hard to do that because it's very hard and it's very messy, and it's easy to get caught up on the details of like, how could somebody do this atrocity? Like, I think it's unequivocal to say like slavery is one of the worst things you can do, and like the idea of like having to justify it is very, very hard to do. But like I think people get hung up on the details when you could just be like, some people are evil, but I think there is something that could be explored with the kind of person who genuinely thinks that they are doing the bearers or the slaves a service. You are like, the show that this game is definitely taking inspiration from actually explored this, where there were people who were not used to not being slaves, and in fact there was one guy who actually wanted to go back to slavery. Because he wanted to live that life, because he was one of the few that had it good. And so the bearers in the story really feel like they are only there to serve Clive, to make him feel bad and make him want to, you know, like fight God and destroy the king or whatever it is. I don't know. I feel like it could have been more. I feel like there could have been like a bigger exploration of that. Wait, no. Okay. So, and so the thing is, really this was my biggest problem, is this is another thing that people get wrong when they do slavery stories, is that they focus so much on the atrocity. Like, they are so quick to say like, this is like unequivocally bad. And yes, it is, but they never convey how people survive. They never convey what kind of culture emerges from that. They never really convey what kind of culture emerges from that. Like, if the bearers are isolated away from other people, like if they are isolated away from main society and they have to survive, like some of them grow into their old age. Some of them are like, from the moment they're children up until they're adults, and even elderly, are like enslaved. That is all they know. So what I would like to have seen explored is, what kind of language do these bearers create with one another, what kind of music, what kind of like there's a deeper thing to explore. Like this idea that the idea that there would be just nothing but like destitute and like pain. I personally, honestly, I can't buy it in terms of like surely some kind of culture must have emerged. There's like, what is the thing that gave the bearers hope? What is the thing that like got them through the day instead of just like dying after 5 years of working it? You know what I mean? Like it'd be one thing if like the game doesn't really go out of its way at all to explain that like they only live 5 years. We've seen them ones who have been enslaved by decades. So how do they survive? Like how did they get along before Clive? Because from what we have seen, like everything was awful until Clive comes along. But even then, editor here. So one of the things that I forgot to mention is that there are bards canonically within the game. Like they exist, and yet we don't really see any of the music plays. We don't hear any stories. We never see the characters sing or dance or express really any type of joy or have any type of hope. And I think that's something really missing, and a thing that is very doom and gloom that is typically seen in these kinds of stories. It's like they're so focused on the dark, and so often now whenever people say dark, my mind immediately defaults to boring. And not boring as in like it's not interesting to watch, but boring as in like the world isn't really explored. They only explore like a certain like facet of the human emotion or the human spectrum of emotion, and they just completely ignore all of the others. Like, and apparently there is a bar that will sing all of the conquests that you do throughout the game. I haven't found them, but the bar that I'm showing right now, like I didn't really find anything interesting with him, but that might have just been me being tired of it near the end. I guess now let's talk about the characters, because Clive as a character, Clive Rossfield as a character is not somebody who comes along and like spreads joy. He's not a plucky, optimistic protagonist. I think he very much falls into the standard issue stoic, like grumpy protagonist who does grow into somebody who wants to create hope for the people. And he is given lots of opportunities to show that. He is shown to be somebody that creates a lot of hope for the people, but it's through his actions and not really by anything he says. If anything, he does something that will inspire another person, and then that person will inspire others, which I will say in terms of like getting rid of a monarchy is actually pretty good. I don't know that they intended for that, but I do love the idea that like the king just becomes somebody who comes along and like takes care of some pests, and then people can just rule themselves. I have a dog now. So Clive, you have something to say? How do you feel about Final Fantasy 16? So Clive is that thing of, in a lot of ways actually, Final Fantasy 16 feels like it was meant to be a Final Fantasy 14 like expansion or DLC or something. And in that same way, they've mentioned how in Final Fantasy 14 you're meant to have like a silent protagonist because it's meant to be anybody, and Clive also kind of feels that way. And I don't mean to criticize it that much, because Cloud is the same way. Like all the Cloud and Squall are kind of the same way. Like all the main default protagonists, especially the male ones, are kind of boring, and so I don't want to harp on that too much. But also there is something very interesting about the fact that like in Final Fantasy 16, something that I wish they explored more, is that Clive's brother Joshua is the chosen one of the people. Like when they are younger and they're going through the thing. Oh, you want to leave? When they are younger, he is crowned the Phoenix, and like that is supposed to be this like big deal, and he is the one who will like lead the kingdom to great prosperity. And then Clive is the chosen one of the bad guy because he is God or something. He's the special boy who is like meant to be the perfect vessel for God and who will ultimately bring destruction to the world as we know it, because God needs a corporeal form to destroy his own creation. It's easy to criticize that, but like that's pretty par for the course Final Fantasy stuff. Like the God stuff, like I get that. Like I get that. That's fine. It just is kind of weird that like it has a lot. It leaves a lot to be desired in terms of like this is the good versus the bad. I almost kind of wish that like Joshua and Clive had fought each other, but yeah, I mean, I see a lot of these comparisons a lot that like Final Fantasy 16 is a shonen anime, and I very much feel like that in both the good and the bad, where especially at the end, the main character is the only one that can do anything and everyone else is just kind of useless, which sucks because like there's some really cool characters, like I mentioned, Joshua being the chosen one of the people, and also besides looking like Roxas mixed with Marluxia, then like he is kind of doing this like behind the scenes shadow stuff that like you don't really know what he's been doing. You don't know, like he's been living his own life up until now, and it's just kind of mysterious, but then you learn about it and it's also not that interesting. It's just like eh. Then there is Prince Dion, the pretty boy Bahamut avatar, which his fight is like easily the best fight in the whole game. I loved it. I still think about it. I also it does feel funny that like in Kingdom Hearts 3 Donald is the one that used Data Flare, which no other mage has really done, and so they went out of their way to prove that like no, this tough cool looking dragon is stronger than this little duck that doesn't wear pants. But Dion is interesting because he is like pretty openly gay, but also in terms of like representation, I feel like Dion is very efficient in terms of like they gave him just enough personality for people to be able to project onto and then satisfy people and then go on. But then also he ends up falling into the barrier gaze trope where he just dies for no reason. He's also the one that can like flies them to the final boss because he has wings. Then there's Sid, who I do love that in every Final Fantasy game there's a Sid, and in this one they just decided to like go like more with it and like his name isn't just Sid, it's Sidolphus, which is just so funny to me. Like it's just such a fun, ridiculous name when like it really is just so simple. But he serves as the radicalization agent for Clive in terms of like he is the one who has the dream. He is the one who has a plan and then like goes off and saves the people and does all the good stuff. And that was interesting. Like he's easily the best design, the coolest character. I pre-ordered his hot toy. Like I'm excited to get that because I think he's actually better than Barrett from Final Fantasy VII in terms of that, in terms of like getting somebody on his side and getting people rallied into a mission and like has a concrete plan. Then, oh gosh, poor Jill. I guess Jill can serve as a litmus test on whether or not somebody thinks that a female character is well written. Because like if they think Jill is well written, I just know not to trust her opinion. Jill starts off very interesting because she goes the childhood friend who grows up to be a dominant, aka somebody who can control this elemental god, and seems capable and feels like a guilt over what she has done because she was enslaved and forced to do terrible things in the name of the king. And it seems like she is having her own arc until she doesn't. And I brought up the shonen anime comparison earlier because that is typically a fate of female shonen characters where eventually they get sidelined because they are in the main character's way. And I don't know whether to give it credit or not because of how blatantly they just say it. Like, so I don't know that I mentioned this, but Clive has this like special power because he's the special boy of the bad guy, that he is able to take these gods away from people. Like he is able to absorb their powers. And usually he has done this after like defeating them. So for Dion, he defeats them and then he absorbs his power. Same with like Titan. But with Jill, he doesn't fight her for it. In fact, so in the context of the story is that they are recovering from a battle and they start talking. It's like a very intimate moment. And Clive is doing the main character thing of like, I have to burden the weight. I have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. And Jill comes along and is like, I know that you have to feel like that. And she gets damseled like 2 or 3 times, and we have to go save her. Despite her having these god powers, she still needs saving. And so at this point in the story, like this intimate moment, she decides that she's going to give us her power so that she is not on the front lines anymore. She is no longer a target. And so he doesn't have to worry about her anymore. He can have this power that will make him stronger so that he could, I don't know, I guess save her if she ever does get in trouble. But also she pulls like the lady from Hamilton. So that she doesn't get in his way. And which is it's so baffling to me, honestly. Like, what kind of trade is this? Like, Clive, you get phenomenal cosmic power, and Jill gets a UTI because because I did not hold R2 to wash his dick. Like, as far as we know, as far as we've seen, this man has never showered, like, ever. So it's not clean. It's not but yeah, like it, but even like I was crediting the magic system before, but also now it's bad because despite Clive absorbing their powers, Jill and Dion both still have their powers. So it's not exactly clear, like, what was the point? If they can both still fight, what's the point of like taking it away from them? Which later on after this, Joshua does yell at Clive, telling him that you're not doing this by yourself. You have friends, you have a support system, you have Gav, the hideaway, you have a blacksmith that makes you these awesome swords. Like, you're not doing this by yourself. You don't have to do this by yourself. People are helping you, which I do appreciate, but then like the narrative then goes out of its way to tell you, and actually no, Clive is the only one that can do this. Clive is the one that like has to burden this weight. I think ultimately the culmination of my disappointment came in the last fight when you were fighting God. And typically in Final Fantasy games, like as you do your last like showdown, you have a thing, some kind of moment where you go to each of your party members. They are shown front and center, and they are cheering on, and you do some power friendship speech, and then you fight, and then you win. And in this one, it doesn't do that. Like, Clive is literally alone. He uses the powers of the people that he stole. He hears their voice, but they're not really there. And I don't know. It felt, I was left feeling empty because I wanted more, but also I have to come to terms with the fact that Final Fantasy is just moving in a different direction than like what I grew up with and what I know. Which this is how, from everything I've read, Final Fantasy VII was that for a lot of people. Final Fantasy VII was the game that made a lot of people go, this is not my Final Fantasy. I don't like this. I go back to what it was before. And I think this is just my moment for that. From what I've seen, the directors and the devs think this as their magnum opus. This is where they want the game to go to. And from all the reviewers I've seen, it seems that a lot of people who have not traditionally been into Final Fantasy, this is their game that got them into Final Fantasy. And being a big AAA game, you have to reach the lowest common denominator in terms of like story. So I think this also just comes with me coming at a point nearing 30 years old where I've just experienced enough stories that I just want more nuance. I want more depth. and I'm never gonna get that in a game that is by design intended to be played by millions of people. It's always just going to be a little bit shallow. It's always just going to be a little bit like, it's always just going to be a little bit surface level for me. I think if I knew how I was going to feel about Final Fantasy 16, I think I would have waited for a Black Friday sale. And if Final Fantasy 17 ends up being the same as this, then I just think that it's going to be that. I think I'm always going to, at this point, I think I'm always going to play a Final Fantasy, but I think it's going to not be a day one buy. I think it's going to like be knocked down to a wait for a sale game for me now. And it's bittersweet because on one hand, I've experienced so many stories that like have like grown my knowledge, that like change how I feel about a lot of things. But on the other hand, there's it's nostalgia. Like, this is the thing I love, and like there's just a part of me like feeling like I'm just leaving this thing that has been such an important part of my life behind. And I think ultimately that's the point of this video. Holy shit, it's been an hour. Okay, so I mean, I stuttered a lot. I'm gonna like cut things out, but yeah, I doubt you're still listening to this, but like I just wanted to like put some thoughts out there, like to think about it. I just needed to convey how I feel about this. Sun's going down, so I'm losing my natural light. So like, subscribe. Thank you so much.